for more, let's turn now to Richard Weitz in Washington, D.C. He's the director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute. Thanks very much for speaking to Al Jazeera. If we could first get your reaction to the news of Kim Jong Il's death.
Well, it was anticipated that he was going to die soon since he looked ill. He had disappeared for a while in a stroke. But people here were never sure when, and that was very important, the when, because he's in the process, or was in the process, of delicately transferring power to his son in what it has to be a contested succession process, because the son is so young and so inexperienced. We're pretty certain that a number of the North Korean generals, some of the veterans of the revolution and the war with the United States and beyond, are uncomfortable having someone so young and inexperienced in charge. The thinking was if he could have survived maybe 5, 6 years longer, he would have been able to push that through. But because his son he's died so young, his son is still. So it's almost like an animal pack, that if the mother is able to survive long enough to raise her child to be very strong and powerful, then this child can take over. But if she dies young, then the other hyenas I'm thinking of would go after and kill or banish or ostracize the youngster. So I'm afraid he might be in charge of the funeral planning, but we anticipate there'll be some kind of succession struggle very soon.
And how worried do you think the U.S. is about this possible power struggle ahead?
It could be very bad. We've been very lucky that the past year it's been very quiet. As you recall, the previous year was terrible. They were thinking of the South Korean warship. They were shelling on the border. But for the past year it's been very quiet, and we've been sort of wondering why. It's been thinking as maybe they're pushing through the succession struggle. Next year was supposed to be a big celebration, the centennial of the birth of the great leader, the transformation of the country into a prosperous state, and they had a bunch of designations. Now that's all called into question. And you can play it out two ways. It could be that because of the internal confusion, the succession struggle, they'll go back to why they're called the hermit kingdom. They'll just go back to isolation, try and seal out the outside world as they sort out their internal differences. But there was some thinking that the problems we were having last year was because their father was trying to show how tough and strong he and his son could be. And so they were trying to act very belligerent. And there's a fear now that we're going to see this kind of contest, that they'll try and show how tough and strong they are, and that means the rest of us are going to suffer.
And Richard, before this announcement of Kim's death, there were reports that there were months of behind-the-scenes political, diplomatic negotiations between the U.S., North Korea, and China. Is that what you were hearing, and do you expect that this will continue in light of what's happened?
Yes, and in fact, a few days ago, and even today, there was indication that there was going to be some kind of deal, that the Americans were going to give large quantities of food aid to the North Koreans, and in return, the North Koreans would make some kind of concessions. Now, we've tried that several times before, and it never really worked out in the implementation stage. But, you know, for lack of something better, they were going to try it again. And now, again, this is calling everything into question. So that's true. And the Chinese are it's going to be interesting how they play it, because whenever you talk to them, they don't want to talk to you about the subject. They're very sensitive. They're the ones who are actually most worried about the implosion of North Korea. And they want to work with the U.S. to prevent any chaos from spreading, but they don't want the United States to move its troops north. They don't want to see the collapse of the regime, and they have a bunch of other red lines. And so it's going to be a very delicate negotiation between China and the United States as we both, as well as the other surrounding countries, observe what happens in North Korea.
Richard, thank you very much. Richard Weitz is the director of the Center for Political Military Analysis at the Hudson Institute, speaking to us from Washington, D.C.